Hello and welcome to episode number 313. This is the Project Management Podcast at pm-podcast.com, and I'm Cornelius Fichtner. Thank you for joining us. Here's a little secret for you. Everybody does it. At one point or another during their careers, every project manager will use Microsoft Excel on one of their projects. That in itself is not surprising. After all, budgets are often tight and companies may not want to invest into full-blown project management software. And if they have such a software, there are only a limited of licenses available, which means many stakeholders cannot access the tool. So we project managers, we make do with what we have, and practically everyone has Microsoft Office. But what is surprising is the fact that we just improvise. We simply use Excel to the best of our often mediocre knowledge in order to somehow force a project schedule into those cells. Well, enter Doug Hong and his series of 7 free Microsoft Excel tutorials. In these 7 short videos, Doug shows you how to use Microsoft Excel and create professional Gantt charts, work breakdown structures, checklists, Pareto charts, and more. All for free. And because I liked the free approach, I decided to invite Doug and ask him when and how we should use Microsoft Excel, what Excel features we should learn about in order to better use it for our projects, and how we can identify the moment in our projects when Excel really no longer is the right tool and we have to upgrade to something more solid. And now, let's Excel. Enjoy the interview.
The Project Management Podcast's feature interview.
Today with Doug Hong, business analyst and trainer.
Hello, Doug. Welcome to the Project Management Podcast.
Well, hi, Cornelius. Thanks for having me on your podcast.
So we're going to be talking about Excel and project management, and that really doesn't sound like the sexiest of topics here that we could be talking about. What will our listeners learn today? What's going to be in it for them?
Well, I hope that through this conversation will help to reset some of the expectations that maybe some in your PM audience have about using Excel as a PM tool, and also be able to provide some quick tips in terms of what they can do on maybe a daily basis, and some things that they may not have thought about using Excel for in their project management daily task, and also maybe at the end give a couple of resources to go to learn more about using Excel maybe differently.
And why should Excel be even considered as a project management tool?
Well, we kind of think about Excel and you think, well, is Excel really a project management tool? Yes and no. Well, technically Excel is a spreadsheet, right? It's used to store, organize, and analyze data. And most of the time you're going to find it in the domain of finance, accounting, or operations, those type of functions. But like any popular tool, it could and it does get used outside of its intended purposes. Excel is everywhere. People are familiar with it. It's relatively easy to learn and use. And for the most part, it gets the job done. And for some, they would consider it a default project management tool. Now, some hardcore PMs may poo-poo that idea, but when it comes down to a tool that's relatively easy to use, has a large base of users already, Excel really is kind of hard to beat. Now, if you did a Google search online and you Googled Microsoft Excel in project management, you'll probably get over 1 million hits. If you try to Google Microsoft Project and project management, you'll probably get a little bit less than that. I think in a Wall Street Journal article I read a while ago, there's probably over 1 billion users using Excel in some form or another. And in fact, I work in a large organization, a tech organization, that uses a few project management tools like MS Project and some customized software. And recently, not too long ago, I spoke to a PM on how the cross-functional team that she was working with was using the customized PM software. Her response was that the lead PM would do a lot of more of the task project schedule management in that tool But for the different portions that dealt with people's domains or their work streams, she would actually export an Excel file to them, send it to her. She would make her changes and send back those changes in Excel. I've also been in projects where PM would use Excel as a tracking tool. Though it may not be the best tool for project management, for the most part, it does get the job done. So you'll see that there are many uses, even in large organizations, for using Excel. Maybe not in large projects, but they're going to use Excel in maybe small and medium-sized projects as a PM tool.
All right, let's focus on that because, we've established Excel is everywhere, but it may not be perfect in all circumstances. So when should a project manager really use Excel for project management?
In terms of projects, as I mentioned before, probably for large projects, maybe not always a good idea. But for smaller projects to medium-sized projects, it's probably useful because you can get up and running right away. As I mentioned before, it's ubiquitous. It's almost everywhere. There's probably a knowledge base that's already out there. People from very beginning to maybe intermediate users. If it's provided at the company, most enterprise companies, they provide some kind of Microsoft Office suite, and Excel is probably be part of it. And even if you don't work for a company that provides that, you can probably get it at a low cost. It's not costly to attain. It's available on the Mac and Windows. It's cross-platform. You can use it cross-platform. Now that it's part of the cloud-based solution of Office 365, it's also available as a cloud solution. There's some advanced data analysis features in Excel that helps you do some analysis of your data. If you're looking at data and working in projects, working with pivot tables and doing some forecasting, doing lookups, it has some really nifty data analysis features. Also, it's very presentation friendly. I'm sure a lot of people probably in your audience have used Excel to create lots of charts, line charts, bar charts, column charts, maybe even Gantt charts. And there are a plethora of templates that are available off the Microsoft Office site. And you can probably go to third parties to also get additional templates. So there's a lot of good reasons to use Excel in a project, in project management and handling maybe small to medium-sized projects.
And give me a few reasons why I should not be using Excel for project management. You already mentioned larger projects, probably not such a good idea, but why else would it not be a good idea to use Excel?
Excel does a lot of good things if you're able to get into the guts of it and put together functions and formulas. But when you get into an aspect of sharing resources, one person sharing resources with different tasks, if there's scheduling changes that you need to adjust or modify, if you're working across time zones and time formats need to be adjusted, that can all be done in Excel by putting together formulas, but some of these formulas can get pretty long and pretty complex, and you'll get into formula fatigue. So when we get into situations where you're sharing resources, maybe there's a lot of scheduling changes, time formats, that can probably be an area where Excel is probably not the best tool. Also, when we're talking about status changes, if there's a lot of status changes and we're talking about maybe scope creep or scope changes, that's something where Excel may not excel in that situation. Also, versioning. Excel, when you save Excel, it's a file format, and you may be sharing amongst different parts of different stakeholders. Emailing is probably not the best solution. Maybe another solution would be putting it onto a shared drive or some kind of versioning platform, maybe SharePoint, that you can put it on there. But still, there's the idea that, well, it's maybe difficult to look at your change log history. So that may be a challenge. Also, if you're looking to put together a work breakdown structure, a more visual representation of it, it can be done in a way in Excel, but not very cleanly as you would be able to do it in MS Project. And probably last, there's probably some inherent security risk in using Excel if you've got information that's a little bit more sensitive. Excel is not a very robust, it does have some security hooks into it, but it's not a very robust solution if you will have sensitive information within your files.
All right, so we've established pros and cons, and I assume everybody has to make the decision for themselves. Does it make sense for me or does it not make sense for me? And you've also, thrown in a few features here and there that you think people could use. Let's talk about these features. Let's focus on these a little bit. So tell us, what Excel features would be most useful in project management? Let's make it personal. What Excel feature do you personally use in project management?
Well, I think that the ones that I like the most probably is an analytical one, and one is the use of is pivot tables. And pivot tables are a great way to see your data and mix it up. So, for example, you have a raw data file. Maybe you have sales data for different folks in different regions, different time periods. Using pivot tables, you can take that raw data, put it into a pivot table, and you can adjust how did the salesperson do at this time period in Q1 in all the fiscal years, or which region performed the best in Q2 or in this fiscal year. It lets you do a lot of analysis to help you make decisions. Another type of feature I also love to use in Excel is conditional formatting. And that's basically when you have a table of data and the data changes, and you want to be able to visually highlight data. So for example, let's say you've got a threshold cell between your threshold is maybe 70, 80, 90, 100. You can set up the conditional formatting. If it goes close to 90, maybe it's green. If it's between 80 and 90, it's yellow. The cell color changes. You can have icon sets in there. People are really like the signaling light, the red, yellow, and green signaling light. It can do that based on changes in the cell. And that's part of the feature set in the conditional formatting feature in Excel. Also, lookup functions are fantastic. A little bit more intermediate, but VLOOKUP functions or index functions. So if you've got two tables, you're trying to reconcile data, and you're trying to look up specific data in a larger table, you can use VLOOKUP formulas and index and match formulas to help you look up information in your larger table. And I think last but not least, there also is I mentioned changelog history previously. There is a feature in Excel. It's very similar to Microsoft Word where you can track changes. So if you're sharing your Excel file with folks and you're expecting some changes, then they can have some modification rights into it. You can actually turn on track changes in Excel. Not as powerful as what you would see in Microsoft Word, but it does do a fairly decent job of helping you track changes in files that you share.
Yeah, I can really support the statement you made with VLOOKUP. It is an intermediate function in Excel, but once you know how this thing works, I use VLOOKUP probably once a week to analyze my own data, and it is extremely powerful. Plus, I've just learned something new because I didn't even know that Excel has a track changes function. That's perfect. What best practices should we remember when we're using Excel in project management?
I think it's probably overall in any type of project management using any tool. And I think the first thing you need to think about is agreeing on terminology. And when you're creating tables and you've got these headers and fields, sometimes the terminology between different functions in our organization, sometimes the different definition of when a project is red, green, and yellow differs from different functions in the organization. And agreeing on the terminology is probably paramount to understanding so people do not get mixed signals. Also, determining where and who is a single source of truth. Basically, if you're the owner of that file, you're the single source of truth. If you're sharing it with other folks, other stakeholders, maybe the single source of truth is a location, a SharePoint somewhere, or some kind of platform where you can put the file and you can check in and check out. Now, as I mentioned, the track changes feature is probably a good way to mitigate some types of situations where you might have conflict in sharing the file. And I think the last thing I want to talk about is a table structure in Excel. Now, people may be familiar with just creating a table. You have your fields, your first row, which is your header fields, and then the subsequent rows would be your records. But you can actually turn that pseudo table into a table where Excel automatically puts together a filter. You can filter under it. Once you create that table, there is a row at the bottom where you can do some totaling, summing, and averaging. When you create formulas within the table and you add new lines, the formulas will automatically copy down. And these are some of the examples of a table structure. When you create a table and you turn it into a table, it sounds kind of weird, but when you create a table, you think you're creating a table, you're just putting values within the cells. But once you turn it into a table, there's a bunch of other features that you can utilize in the table feature.
We mentioned earlier Excel, maybe not so good in large projects, but potentially for small projects and medium-sized projects. But how do I know? I mean, I'm starting out with Excel today. How will I know? Okay, I've outgrown this. I need to move to something more robust here.
Yeah, and I think maybe the most telling sign is when your stakeholders or users start complaining.
Yeah, all right. That's a perfect sign.
Which happened in one project that was, and we were using Excel as kind of like a schedule tracker, and people were starting to see that there was just too much information in there, and they had mentioned, "Are we going to put this onto something else that was a little bit more easy to access?" Now, when we're talking about at that time, we're talking about adding more stuff into Excel. And then when we're talking about adding more stuff, maybe the tabs and worksheets start to grow. If you've got an Excel workbook with 20 tabs, 20 worksheets, maybe it's time to reconsider using Excel as a PM tool. If you're in a situation where you do a lot of calculations within Excel, you may start to notice that it starts to bog down. And that happened in the project that I was in, where we had different calculations, VLOOKUPs, and different functions that would perform calculations. And after a while, the Excel file would bog down. Outside of Excel, if there's an increased use of resource sharing, or if there's more people that you expect to access the file, maybe modify the file, maybe it's time to move to a new tool. Also, if you need to do some more, of course, you need to do some more feature-rich things in a project management tool that Excel doesn't do, like define the critical path or whatnot, or create a really feature-rich Gantt chart. Maybe Excel is not the tool anymore to use.
Let me throw a totally different question here. What about tools that are similar to Excel, like OpenOffice or Google Sheets? Do the general suggestions that you've had for Excel translate to these other tools?
Yes, they do. And Excel probably is like the gold standard of a spreadsheet tool. Other tools on the Mac platform or the OpenOffice tools, I think on the Mac there's another tool. The name escapes me, but there's also third-party tools like Smartsheets, which kind of like utilize an Excel structure, spreadsheet structure, so you can do project management a little bit more, better in it. These tools, when you think about it, they fall under the same kind of heuristics, the same guidelines that you probably want to think about when you're trying to go from a spreadsheet-like tool to a more robust project management tool.
Mm-hmm. I can see how collaboration on the sheet level is possible when we're talking about, the online version of Excel in the cloud, or when we're talking about Google Sheets, where multiple users can access the same document simultaneously. How do you deal with the collaboration issue here when we're talking about the file base? So are we just sending Excel files back and forth and import and export them, like the example you mentioned at the beginning?
So there's a couple ways that could be done. I mean, that could be done if the team is small enough, the scope of the project is not too large. Sending them back and forth and using track changes and maybe adding versioning text onto the file name is a idea that most folks can utilize or use. When we get to maybe a little bit more folks involved within the project, a more robust solution probably be something like SharePoint or some other type of sharing or documenting type of platform. In the company that I work for, we use a solution from Documentum that does versioning for files. It doesn't not only for Excel but other files that you can share. And so there's other tools that are out there for you to use to help collaborate. I think the gist of it is having an agreement with your stakeholder audience and how you're going to collaborate and setting up some expectations on what the team should do or not do when you're sharing the files.
Of course, our conversation here is an audio conversation, and to really see how this is done and how it works, you need to see it to believe it. It's kind of like eating books or talking about movies. It's both useless activities. So we need to guide our listeners here and send them to some resources where they can learn more about this. What are your suggestions? Where can they go?
Well, I think Excel is one of those things that it's a visual tool for you, and I'm more a visual learner, and I appreciate people who do visual teaching. And one of the folks that does that is Mike Irvin. He's got an Excel channel on YouTube. He's called Excel is Fun, and he is hyper friendly, super fast when it comes to like learning Excel, and he's got an amazing collection of Excel tips and videos out there. I think he's got right now over 2,000 videos on YouTube, ranging from basic to very intermediate type of tips. So that's one resource that is probably fantastic to go to. Another one is from Deborah Douglas. I'm hopefully I am not mispronouncing her name, but she also has a YouTube channel, but she's got books. She's got a blog site called contextures.com. She also is an MVP, a Microsoft MVP. Mike Irvin from Excel is Fun is also a Microsoft MVP. That's the designation that they put back into the community for their specific software product, Excel in this case. And they're sharing with the wider audience, the global audience. So they get that designation of an MVP. But contextures.com and the YouTube channel, Excel is Fun, you can just go to YouTube and search for Excel is Fun, and you'll find that. And Contextures is contextures.com. Also another great site to learn more about Excel.
Right. And we can't forget your own website, exceltraining101.com. And because on your website, you're focusing in one section, at least on one page, you have these 7 free Microsoft Excel video tips for project managers. And I looked at them and they're really spot on. So if the listeners are looking for something that is really targeted, how do I create a basic Gantt chart using Excel, or a work breakdown structure, or a checklist, or a bullet chart, a Pareto chart, you have videos that speak directly to the project manager. And we're going to put a link to that page into our show notes. So go back to the Project Management Podcast website, look for this episode, and you will see a link to exceltraining101.com with the page that will take you to those 7 videos there. So to close this out, Doug, what are your top 3 tips for our listeners in regards to using Excel as a project management tool?
I think outside of the ones that I mentioned before earlier, I think some other ones that are probably pretty handy is using the fill handle. Now, the fill handle is a small little square. Once you make a selection in a cell, let's say, for example, you've got a table and you put another column in and you put a formula in, and the first cell in that row, and you want to copy that formula down, right at the bottom right, when you select that cell, is a little square box. And once you drag that square box down, it's going to copy the formulas down. When you left click it and copy it down, it would copy it down. Excel will try to think about, what you're trying to copy down and make a best guess. Now, if you right click it, you can copy it down where maybe you have a series of increasing numbers, 1, 2, 3, or 1, 3, 5, or a series of increasing dates, like Sunday or days, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and Excel will copy it down. So using the fill handle, left clicking and right clicking that little fill handle will help you copy things much quicker. Also, tip number 2, there's a status bar at the bottom of your Excel window. Now that status bar, maybe you don't want you have a bunch of cells where you're doing calculations and you don't want to create another formula. You wanted some simple formula where you can sum or average. Now at the bottom there is actually a indicator that tells you if you have a sum or total or average. So what you can do is you can select a range of cells where you want to sum something, and at the bottom it'll show you the summed up amount or the average amount. Now to get the additional features on there, you just need to go to the bottom, right click it, and check off the ones that you want. I think you can do sum, you can do average. There's probably some other ones that escaped my mind right now, but the status bar down there does calculations. Another thing you want to do, or the third or last one I probably want to give your audience, is customizing the QAT. Sounds like a duck, but it's QAT. That's the Quick Access Toolbar. That's that little toolbar right at the very top if you got Windows, Excel 2010, at the very top there's a couple icons. I think by default there's a save icon and maybe a print icon or a redo icon. You can actually customize the QAT. I sound like a duck now. You can customize the quick access toolbar to include other icons for common commands that you perform. Maybe you print preview a lot. You can actually click the little drop down on that QAT and add that icon on there. And so you can add a bunch of icons which may not show up in the regular ribbon, but can show up there where you want to quickly access it on if you do that a lot, you can just quickly access it in the QAT.
All right, perfect. Doug, thank you so much for your time today and talking to us about how to best use Excel in project management.
Well, thanks for having me on.
And that was our interview with Doug Hong and his tips and tricks about using Microsoft Excel for your projects. If you are a project manager who wants to become PMP certified, then the easiest way to do so is with our sister podcast, the PM Prepcast, and study for the exam by watching the in-depth exam prep video training from pmprepcast.com. And that's it. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find us on the web at pm-podcast.com. Please send your emails to info@pm-podcast.com. And yes, when you write, please do tell me where in the world you are writing from. And finally, we have this quote that fits today's topic nicely. Nothing is as easy as it looks. Until next time.